In this video, we're really going to deep dive into what React is and kind of how to think about things in components, because that's really the key to being able to build applications with React. So to do that, I'm going to jump over to the React homepage so that we can take a look at exactly what React is. So here we are on the homepage of React, and you can see just by looking at the subtitle exactly what React is trying to do. It's a JavaScript library for building user interfaces, and that's really at the core what React is about. React is about making the experience of building user interfaces so much easier to do for the developer, and also making those user interfaces much better for the end user so that it's so much easier for them to actually follow along and use your application, and it makes it more enjoyable for the consumer and for the developer, which is a win-win in my opinion. And the way that React does this is the idea of being a component-based system. Everything that you build in React is going to be a component, and then you're going to take all of those components and combine them together to order to build an actual application. And it makes it incredibly easy to do, and you don't even need that much code. If we go down here a little ways, a really popular JavaScript application is the idea of a to-do application. And as you can see here, this really fairly small application, in my opinion, this is all the code that you need in React in order to build this full to-do application over here. And as you can see, we can type in whatever we want, click add, and you can see we can type even more, and it just constantly adds those for us. So this is a fully working to-do application in less than 100 lines of code over here. Now in this video, I'm not going to dive into what this code does or how this code works, but as you can see just by looking at the homepage here of React, as I mentioned, it's a component-based library. So the way you build things in React is by splitting them into components and then building those individual components and then combining them all together. So if we just look at this homepage of React here, we can already see a bunch of different types of components. And essentially as a component is anything that is either repeated on the application. For example here, these different header sections, each one of these could be their own component. For example, we could have a component here which contains this information, and this information over here is the exact same component. As you can see, they look exactly the same, they share the same styling. The only thing that's different is the actual content inside of them. And that's the way the component works. You create a component which essentially says, this is how something should look. This should be kind of how it works. This is how it interacts. And all you do is you say, now this is what you put inside of the component. And that's how components work. So over here, we could have a component for these different sections here, these different points of interest. So that's, for example, a point of interest component is what we could call it. And down here, we have even more ideas of components. Each one of these giant sections over here that contains this title, the code, as well as the result, is one big component. We could call it, for example, code section. And then also inside of this component, we have other components. This left-hand section could be a component, which could be description component. In the middle, we could have code editor component. And on the right, we could have result component. So components can actually contain other components inside of them. And that's really where the power of React comes in. You build out small little components, and then you put those small components inside of larger components, and you put those larger components inside of even larger components, and eventually, all of your really small components get put together until they're inside of one giant application-sized component. And the real power of components is that if you want to change how, for example, this editor looks, let's say you wanted a white background on your editor instead of a black background, all you would need to do is change that inside of one single component, and it would update all of your other instances of this component across your entire application, as you can see here. It also works for if you want to change how the interactivity works. Let's say that we wanted to add another button up here that we wanted to do, for example, toggling the background color. We could add that inside of the one single component, and then that component, since all of these editors are using that same component, it would actually show up on all the different editors. And that's really the main power of React, is being able to build things in a component-based way. But something else that React does that's incredibly useful is it actually automatically re-renders your application whenever you start changing the state of your application. So for example here, if I were to toggle this JSX button here, you can see that the code inside of here is automatically changing whenever I do that. And in a normal JavaScript application, that's actually fairly difficult to do, to actually change something whenever you change something else. So if a user clicks a button, you normally need to hook up an event listener, and then you need to call some kind of function, and then you need to change your code, and then you need to make sure that everything that depends on that code is re-rendered. And that's the hard part, making sure you only re-render the things that need to be re-rendered, not re-rendering too much, and making sure the re-render works properly is really difficult in normal JavaScript. But with React, it's all taken care of for you. All you do is just change the state. You say, is checked, false. And then it does everything for you and changes it all. And we're going to see that just in the very first project that we look at. and you'll be able to see the power of React just by looking at that single example. I really hope this basic explanation was able to give you a little bit of an understanding of why React is so important and what exactly React is and what it's used for. I don't expect you to in-depth know how components work or how to put them together. That's what we're going to be discussing throughout the rest of this course, and especially in the very first hour of this course. But in the next video, we're just going to take a look at all the different tools and software that we need to download in order to get up and running with a working environment to be able to use React, and you'll be surprised it's actually a very small list of software. So I can't wait to see you in the next video where we finally get started on actually going nitty-gritty into working in the code and building with React.